Hello there, everybody. It is that time again. It is the cool down room with myself and Bowser. We are here to talk all things Chinese Grand Prix weekend. Um, it was an interesting weekend to say the least. Let's dive straight into it. Sprint weekend, so first one of the year. So this would be one of the tracks I wouldn't have thought would be great for a sprint, and I feel like I was justified in that. But anyway, we'll start. We're going to go from race order finish and just talk about each driver as to go along, just so there's no confusion. That's kind of where we're going with this. So we're going to start with Valtteri Bottas, who unfortunately did not finish the Chinese Grand Prix, which is a real shame. Started off well with his sprint qualifying, where he came ninth, and then fell back a little bit in the sprint race, went down to 12th, and then in the actual qualifying for the main Grand Prix was 10th again. Putting that Sauber where it really has no right to be. Valtteri Bottas really stepping up this year, I'm starting to feel. I couldn't help but feel bad for the guy. He's done everything right all weekend, and DNF in the end. Do you remember what it was for, Bowser?
DNF, the engine malfunctioned and he kind of lost the engine just going into the chicane, just before that long right-hander onto the back straight. He had to pull onto the runoff area, and which obviously wasn't far enough away from being in a really dangerous spot in case two cars had an issue there or anything like that. And with the marshals getting on the track, the reason why there was a full safety car, even though they were trying to originally do it under double waved yellows, was because the car was stuck in gear as well, so it just wouldn't move. So they had to get the get just truck in to do that. Which after the Jules Bianchi situation in Japan, sort of 7 or 8 years ago, just seems to be a big blanket no when it comes to that stuff. So yeah, they pulled a full course yellow on that one to make sure everyone was as safe as
A bit
possible.
weird at the time, though, wasn't it? The delay in even a virtual safety car coming out. It seemed to be for ages. Bottas was actually out the car alongside it before they eventually put the virtual safety car out, which is mental in my opinion. Absolutely mental. No driver should ever
Yeah.
be on track when on physically out of the car on the track without at least a virtual safety car. It was just crazy.
No, I totally agree. And you saw it again when Russell had that issue in Australia as well. He was calling for the red flag because he was, really exposed in the middle of the track side on. Obviously, there's been a lot of issues with side on collisions recently. They have strengthened that up from year to year, and especially going into this year as well. There's a new sort of safety test, the limit that they have to reach, which is good. But I think with Russell's situation as well, he was worried because he was on one side. The underfloor would have taken the damage if the car T-boned him at that point, which obviously that isn't part of the testing because you don't expect cars to come from underneath you. So I mean, obviously that's all sorted or anything, but yeah. So that's why there is sort of this sort of. I was particularly disappointed in how long it took to do. It's they've got this facility now of a VSC, the virtual safety car. It neutralizes the race. Yes, some people can get sort of cheaper pit stops, but it's more of only really a benefit of about sort of 4 or 5 seconds better. You don't get the gain that you would on a full course safety car, which can be sort of 12, 14 seconds or whatever it is. So I was really disappointed that they didn't just throw the VSC straight away and then work out if they needed more than that, which obviously they did in the end. But yeah, it's so dangerous even under double waved yellows. I mean, we notice it even just sort of virtually racing. Your competitive nature, you forget about the danger that's on the side of the track. Obviously, I know there's no danger in virtual racing, don't get me wrong, but you forget completely about the dangers of why that yellow's out there, and you're still trying to gain within the delta the most competitive edge you possibly can. So that's where, like, that whole thing is brought in for safety, the yellow flags and everything. So, yeah, I do not understand. I was disappointed with how long it took to bring the VSC and then the full safety car as well. Um, so yeah, hopefully they'll learn from this. I mean, there's been multiple times in the past where they haven't, but hopefully now this will be a reason to bring it sort of, jump on that VSC a bit quicker in the future races.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. So moving on to 19th place, which is Yuki Tsunoda. Bit of
Mm.
a bad weekend for him. Qualified 19th in the sprint. Got up to 16th though, which was not terrible in the Racing Bull. But considering his results recently, we would have been expecting more. I think Racing Bulls would have been expecting more as well. And then qualifying for the main race again, 19th, and then DNF. He got hit by Magnussen, I believe, damaged the tyre. I'm not entirely sure if there was more damage than what we were told. It just seemed like he got a puncture and was like, oh, I'm done, and parked it up. But I'm sure it must have been like suspension damage or something that we didn't know about. But yeah, a nightmare weekend for Yuki Tsunoda, considering how well he's been doing recently. And yeah, not something he will hope will continue.
Yeah, I think he was basically outshadowed by Daniel Ricciardo for possibly the first. Obviously, no disrespect to Daniel, but probably the first time this season. Which, like I said, is good for Daniel. But Yuki again, like we said last year, he's been actually last race weekend. Sorry, it's been really impressive. This start of the season in what is inherently not a great car, as we found out. So. Yeah, a little bit disappointing for Yuki, especially in his pursuit of trying to impress the main Red Bull team. This certainly won't go down in his favour this weekend, but yeah, the incident itself, yeah, I agree, but I think there was definitely some wheel rim damage as well, more than just the tyre sort of delaminating there. So that kind of inherently says if there was an actual sort of thicker contact on the axle and through the wheel drum, that would cause much more issues like throughout the actual mechanics of the back of the car. So obviously, these drivers are never going to park up if they don't have to. So you've got to assume that there was some, like you said, suspension's normally the first thing that goes in that scenario on a contact similar to that. But I think the thing that sort of strikes me the most, especially in that sort of scenario there where he fell out the race, it's the aggressiveness of Kevin Magnussen, to be honest. He's had so many run-ins throughout all of his career, really, with other drivers, just saying how aggressive he is and uncompromising. Which, don't get me wrong, there's other drivers like Max who are also like that, but Max has been able to sort of command this respect at the same time while doing it, where K-Mag has always had that just almost like to the point of reckless sort of tag on him, and he just keeps on getting into the incidents after again. When he came back, when Gunther brought him back into Haas to replace Mazepin a couple of years ago, he seemed like whatever form he was doing before, I think it was IndyCar, might have calmed him down a little bit. Because he seemed a lot sort of more settled at that point and sort of less. I think he was in a better inherent car, to be honest. So when he's sort of easier to drive, didn't have to sort of fight his more aggressive moves rather than defending all the time. But yeah, now he's back to a car that's struggling again. He's fight, which don't get me wrong, of course we want to see people fight him, but he always seems to find the limit and go over it slightly. And unfortunately for Yuki, that happened today in the race, which was a bit of a shame for him. Because I think his qualifying was poor this weekend. I mean, there's no sort of shadow in that. But his race pace, I don't think was actually that bad, based on sort of, he was working his way up through the field.
Sprint and he was doing it again. And...
Yeah, exactly. So I thought, when they had the incident, I think he was on better tyres and pushing on. So I think it was could have been a much sort of more promising result than it was of. Unfortunately, ended for VCarb, as they're also known as. So not a great weekend for VCarb at all. And because we're about to move on to the other issue with VCarb's weekend.
Just quickly before we move on to Kevin Magnussen getting a 10-second penalty for that, which will play a role later on. So moving on to the next one, and yes, you kind of foreshadowed it there, and Daniel Ricciardo of the DNF. He got a feel for a guy. He had a great weekend so far, out-qualified Yuki in the sprint, finishing 14th, then went on to move up to 11th, just shy of top 10 in the sprint, which is, I know the points don't go down to 10 in the sprint, but still, that's got to be encouraging. Then qualifying for the main event, 12th, again, Tsunoda 19th, so he's definitely shown that he's improved here. Whether or not it has been a chassis issue, I think we'll have to wait another race to find out, in case it's just this race suits Ricciardo more than Yuki kind of deal, but it would be nice if it was the chassis and he is now feeling more confident with it all. But yeah, great race, was doing really well and shunted by Lance Stroll behind the safety car, which is ridiculous. I know people might be saying like, oh, what was Stroll supposed to do? But, you're behind the safety car. You've got to be aware of these things. We know this from our online racing. Anyone can do anything. You've got to allow the space. Stroll didn't. Punted Ricciardo into the back of Piastri. And then Nico Hulkenberg went through. Ricciardo then at the next safety car period, then tried to pass Hulkenberg back, thinking, well, it was my position anyway, I should have been there, and then has now, as you have looked into it, received a penalty. Do you want to tell us more about that penalty?
Yeah, I'll start with the penalty sort of description. So I'm reading straight off of the F1 report, the journalists sort of write up on this. So the paragraph goes: the driver of car 3, so Ricardo, admitted that he overtook car 27 deliberately, but it's explained that he felt that he could do so as car 27 had overtaken him under the safety car before on lap 28. We note that car 27 was permitted to overtake car 3 on lap 28, and there's Article 55.8, which I don't know the handbook that well, so I
Article
can't.
55.8 is a vehicle may pass another car under the safety car if they seem to be having problems, which obviously being punted off the track is interpreted as a problem.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Thank you. There was no justifiable basis for car 3 to re-overtake car 27 while the race was still under safety car conditions. We accordingly impose a 10-second time penalty on car 3. As car 3 was unable to serve the penalty due to retirement, this has been imposed as a 3-grid place penalty for car 3, which is Ricardo, again at the next race, which is Miami in 2 weeks' time. Or the next race the driver participates, which you'd hope would be Miami. Cool. So that also means, unfortunately, as it's a penalty that is being carried over to the next race, the other sort of double whammy to that, unfortunately, is as it finishes off, that means Ricardo, who also picked up 2 penalty points on his license, and will take a grid drop for the sprint during the next round of the race in Miami. So at least it is only a penalty on the sprint side of things in Miami, but the 2 sort of penalty license points is a bit of a nasty sort of final jab in the side, isn't it? Really, it seems incredibly harsh. Yes, obviously you know safety car rules are rules, and yeah, but this is the kind of thing that if it's that clear cut that they were happy that Hulkenberg was able to overtake the other 2 while they were having their issue, which seemed fair enough. And don't get me wrong, I don't disagree with that per se. It's unfortunate for Ricardo, don't get me wrong, but I don't disagree with that, because you can't just park up and basically go and have a coffee and wait for them to finish having their little Barney before you carry on.
Another accident doing that.
Exactly, yeah, you absolutely would, especially sat on the apex like Hulkenberg. But you could see on the replay, actually, he was looking over to the left, seeing if one of them was going to come back and carry on, but he waited a little bit, and then it was just like, look, exactly like you say, I'm sat on the apex here, I'm going to get shunted myself if I don't move. So yeah,
it's one of those things where the team should have been giving Daniel the correct information. I feel like he's been a bit let down with the team there. Whether or not they told him to overtake or he's taking it onto his own thing, I don't know. But if they should have known, could he do it or not? And if he then did it and wasn't supposed to, they should have told him to go back. Or if they told him to do it, then they were wrong.
Well, that's the thing. I think
there's something gone wrong there.
Yeah, these sorts of things. Even the stewards. There needs to be something in the race. This is ridiculous. Like something that's like as easy to sort out as that. Of like, yeah, we were happy with Hulkenberg going through, but we were not happy with Ricardo going back through. That should just be a case of give them the place back, and that's it. It doesn't need to be more than that. Like, it can be solved there and then. There doesn't need to be anything hanging over to the next race. That could, Ricardo could be sort of 8th, 9th in that sprint. Pulling up a few points, which could be vital for RB at the end of the season.
If he gets a 10-second penalty and they tell him while he's still in the race, he'd have probably taken that before retiring the car. Like bloody Perez and bloody Japan last year, where they put him back out to do the penalty. Like, it's a weird one. It should have been straight cut. I don't know why it wasn't. There's obviously more to it. It's still obviously just kind of come out recently, so we'll probably find out more. Maybe it's all kicked off because Racing Bulls complained at Hulkenberg passing and it's bit them in the butt. Who knows? But all in all, a good weekend for Ricardo.
I was going to say, yeah.
That incident with Stroll. Hopefully a sign that things are turning around for him, and he's going to have a strong second half of the season. I really hope so, because we love Danny Rick. Yeah. So anyway, moving on to also before I move on, just a little bit of a caveat or a little bit of knowledge for you. You were saying earlier about in the rule it says, or the next race day race. Well, Jenson Button still has a free grid place penalty to take if he ever comes back into the sport from the Monaco crash. So there you go. So that is actually the reason that is a thing. So there you
I
go.
really thought for a second you go, and that's the reason why he's not had another race since.
I,
So that's
I'd
dramatic.
love for a Button comeback. It's not going to happen.
So-
That's even less likely than a Vettel comeback at this point.
yes. Yeah.
Moving on to 17th place, we've got Logan Sargent, who once again is last of the cars finishing the race. He qualified last for the sprint. He made up 2 places, but only because Alonso DNF'd, and I don't really remember what happened to Hulkenberg in the sprint, but he somehow finished ahead of Hulkenberg as well.
He had to. I think he had a late puncture, didn't he? He had to pit late or something. Or yeah.
Well, there you go. That'll explain that then. So yeah, and then again qualified last for
He-
the
yeah, he
race
was the
as
last. He
well.
was last of the runners that didn't have an issue, basically.
I mean, how many times are we gonna have to say this? What is he doing in that seat? Like, I wanted him to do well, but he's literally last, effectively, of every session this weekend. Like, there's got to be a point where something's got to change. I honestly believe that Toto Wolff is going to be banging on James Vowles' door at the point at which Kimi Antonelli is old enough to come into Formula One. Because that's the reason. At the moment, he's not old enough to be in Formula One. But I reckon that we could see Logan Sargent dropped midway through this season at this rate.
Yeah, it was another poor weekend, unfortunately, for him, and there wasn't really much sort of redeeming elements even to it that we can really pick out. I mean, he, there was loads of cars as well having issues in the sort of full race quali. Hamilton being down there, really struggling, locking up into the hairpin. So great opportunity for sort of a car like his. Albon managed to get through in exactly the same car. Looking at the timesheets, Albon was a second quicker in a qualifying scenario in exactly the same car, which is just
not good. It's just
baffling
not
for
good
me.
enough.
That, don't get me wrong, like you do get the odd occasional performance from one driver, which sort of distorts the overall look of things. When, for example, when Hamilton did that lap that was 3 seconds quicker in the wet round Austria than anyone else on the grid. Yes, Bottas on that occasion would have been looking at himself thinking, what the hell was I doing that my teammate in the South car should do that? But this isn't one of those times. This is consistently...
Albon is battering him every week.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, we regularly say on this channel that how good Albon is, but he's also... We need to sort of, I suppose, now start addressing that. Is it a case of Logan's just actually making him look even better than he even is because of, like I said, his poor performances? And like I said, in this full race quali, Q1, he had a great opportunity to really put some pressure on getting out of that Q1, which he has struggled with, and he drops it in the second S. Like, it just spins off, and that's after a full sprint race, a sprint quali, and a practice session. He's still, even that point, with that much experience around the track. I know there's a lot of sort of actually the younger drivers who hadn't driven Shanghai before because of COVID not being around for the last 4 years. But yeah, exactly. You had sort of Piastri's first one, Tsunoda's first one. That was Zhou's first one. It was, and yeah, I don't actually. If you look at it, none of them actually had fantastic races in comparison to where they normally would be. So there might have been a bit of a struggle there of getting used to that track compared to the more experienced drivers. But yeah, Logan has absolutely no excuse. I don't even think Albon's actually been around this track, has he?
Albon was in his first season, I believe.
Maybe his first season.
First season, I think he finished 13th or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So either way, it's super disappointing for Logan. Don't get me wrong. Like, I know we give him a lot of hassle on this channel, but we really do want him to. The best scenario is that he turns it around and become, and really starts pulling the socks up, and we'd be really happy. We really would.
He's a lovely bloke. Every time you see him interviewed, he's such a nice bloke, and I need him to show up because Williams are a team that's struggling at the moment. The car is clearly not where they wanted it to be. They somehow seem to have made it worse from last year because they were getting points last year and they're not anywhere near the points really. And yeah, when you've got the car that's struggling already, you got one driver that's any hope of getting it, it's really not a position they want to be in.
One thing he is doing is he's absolutely vindicating the decision they took to give Albon the car for the second half of Australia. I mean, if without turning his performance around, he's got no leg to stand on with that decision. He's just making it easier and easier to understand. So, yeah, really disappointing. I still personally struggle to imagine him getting replaced mid-season. I don't think Williams are like the Red Bull family. I think they're a lot more forgiving. He didn't have a great first season, and they kept him on. So I think they'll definitely give him the rest of the season. But yeah, I'm very, very, very surprised. To the point where I put some money on him not being on the grid next year, unless he can start really turning it around in the second half of the season.
He definitely needs to do something special to keep that seat, that's for sure. Okay, moving on to P16, which is Kevin Magnussen. So he had an alright sprint quali, 12th place. That's pretty good for him. Ahead of Hulkenberg, I believe. Yeah, ahead of Hulkenberg. So
won the first times this year as well.
Yeah,
so fair play.
Dominating him, so it's really good there. And then in the sprint race itself, finished 10th, which unfortunately in the sprint is not a point, but it still showed good promise. Then they came round to the actual race quali, and he was nowhere. 17th. Bit of a weird one, going out in Q1 after having such a strong sprint quali. It just makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what was different? Like, it didn't start raining, if I remember correctly, until partway through Q2 in the sprint quali. There was a bit of rain towards the end of Q2.
It was literally only the very last run that got disturbed.
So you can't really say, the track was different then, because it's the same track. So yeah, a bit of a bizarre one for K-Mag, and then basically he finished ahead of Sargent, which let's face it, that's not really good enough. It actually had a 10-second penalty as well for the incident with Tsunoda. All around, not a great race. He would have finished ahead of Stroll, I believe, but because Stroll pitted and took his penalty, he had then fresher tyres and got within 10 seconds and was therefore ahead of Magnussen. So, yeah, not a good weekend for Magnussen at a time when he really needs to. So,
yeah,
for him.
Did Logan Hart-Sargent have another 10-second penalty as well? I don't think he did he?
I don't think he did.
So that means that Magnussen was over 10 seconds ahead because he's kept that 16th ahead of Sargent. I know we've moved on from Sargent now, but that's just something that's just suddenly come to view. I've got the result here.
A little look. I can't see that they're going to play any penalty for Sargent, so that's just that's a even bigger embarrassment for Logan Sargent, really.
He must have had an issue. So the second half of that race that we didn't catch on the cameras, maybe, but yeah. Anyway, sorry. Back to Magnussen. Yeah, like I mentioned it before with the Tsunoda comments that he puts that car. He uses a battering ram sometimes. We want to see close racing. We absolutely do. And there was some really good racing towards the back end. Him and Stroll. I think it had some great side by side for like nearly a full lap, which is brilliant, and that's the kind of one we want to see. And that was really, really good. Obviously, Stroll getting through on better tyres, but at the same time, then he had that issue with Tsunoda, and it just kind of let him back down again. And it's just so disappointing. Like that Haas are another team that really, really need to have both drivers firing on all cylinders to maximise the opportunity when the very, very back points, because there's such a divide between the top 5 teams and the back 5 teams, that they need to absolutely capitalise when there's 1 or 2 points available because one of the top 5 teams have had an issue of some sort. Alonso, for example, going onto those softs and having to pit. That was a great opportunity for some of the others to be really sort of pushing on, getting those points. Obviously, he came back through in the end. Was very, very quick towards the end of the race. But Hamilton was struggling all weekend, and he would have been a really good picking for one of these teams who were just on a really good weekend to just nip those points away, and which, like I said, could be so important towards the end of the season. So. Yeah, another disappointing one for Magnussen. He actually out-qualified, like we mentioned, Hulkenberg, which is really difficult. Hulkenberg's notoriously a very good qualifier, but his race pace as well, which isn't something that Hulkenberg's necessarily known for.
He actually out-qualified Hulkenberg in the sprint in the
Yeah,
actual
only
race,
the
and
sprint.
Hulkenberg
Yeah,
out-qualified him. So
yeah, but even just one session is good. For it's a good start. But yeah, it's then Hulkenberg's able to stay out of trouble, whether it's that meant he was ahead or whatever. Whatever it could be, but. Yeah, either way, part of finishing a race is as much getting to the end cleanly as it is quickly, because you can see, people like Hulkenberg and Zhou, they've benefited from other people having these 10-second penalties, so it's, I think Magnussen's going to be, I think he will stay to the end of the season as well. I don't think Haas will be looking to get rid of him then, but I think with people like, Drogovic, Teo Porcher, drivers like that are
Ollie Behrman.
Ollie Behrman, yeah, absolutely. There's drivers like that are desperate for, and our teams are desperate to see what they can do in F1 cars as well. So I think he's going to be another one like Logan that's going to really struggle, and Zhou, for example, who's going to really struggle to keep a seat unless he really starts, maximising that car and at least getting sort of more on par with his teammate at the very, very least. Like, even if his teammate is doing a really good job.
No, completely agree. I'd be very surprised if we see either Magnussen or Sargent on the grid next year.
Agreed.
Right, moving on to P18 and Lance Stroll, who qualified P15. Pardon, sorry?
You said moving on to P18. It's P15.
Okay, sorry, yeah, no, sorry, that's my bad. Yeah, P15, Lance Stroll, who ironically qualified P15 for the sprint and finished P14, which means he literally made no progress because Alonso DNF'd. He stayed exactly where he was. Then
Aston Martin.
Aston Martin, yeah. And then he actually did all right in the qualifying for the main race. He was 11th, just missing out on the top 10.
Where was Alonso?
Where was Alonso? Alonso was third.
Was it good? Was it good, 11th?
It's good for Stroll.
Well, yeah, but this is what we've been saying about the others.
Yes, no, I'm completely on your side about that.
I know.
To then finish 15th, crashing into a car behind the safety car and trying to blame it on the car you've smashed into is just, how on earth he thinks that Ricciardo was brake testing him when Ricciardo's car was basically inside of Piastri's already at that point is... I think it's maybe Stroll's not quite with it at that point in the safety car restart process or something. But yeah, he's not performing. We've known this for a while. He's not performed since Bahrain last year. Nothing's going to happen. As long as he wants to be there and his dad owns a team, he's going to be there. When we did see the quality was 11th, I had hopes that maybe he'd sorted himself out, but no, he hadn't. It's a bad race pace. Had the incident, had the penalty, took the penalty. That was a smart move from Aston Martin, make him take the penalty. He finished ahead of Magnussen. But yeah, all round, not a good weekend for Stroll, once again.
Yeah, I mean, I get you can argue that is the other driver, like Albon, like Hulkenberg, are they just doing really, really well? But there's again a massive, massive offset in Stroll's performance to Alonso, which again is Alonso one of the greatest of all time, quite possibly. He's in the conversation for sure. Maybe not sort of the top 5, but he's definitely in the top 10, I'd say, of all-time drivers. Absolutely, which is never going to be easy for any driver coming in. But Stroll is literally in the same car that is getting third on the grid. We are turning around and saying that 11th is good for him. And that is all you need to know to see not just this race weekend, but his performances, like you say, since really Bahrain last year. That Aston Martin, on times, has been lightning quick. And he's been nowhere stuck in the midfield pack. And whether it's an inherent issue with qualifying itself, that just means he's stuck in the pack all the time and is struggling to really benefit from a good qualifying. It's not going to help, but you do see other drivers like Alonso in the second half of the race who can slap a new pair of tires on, go aggressive on the strategy, and make passes. he needs to pull his socks up. If when Honda, I think I really fear for his career, which he has had some great races. Again, I know we say this each week, but he has got talent. He dominated a formula, a younger sort of youth formula that had Lando Norris and George Russell in it, and he won and beat them both. But he needs to turn it around, because if he was in any other seat other than a team that his dad owned, I think he would have been gone already.
I was actually
if I'm completely honest.
As you were speaking, I was thinking you could probably swap him with Sargent, and I don't think the results will be much different. And that's saying something, considering how much I've been bashing Sargent. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, that Alonso's proven that Aston is quick as. That's arguably the fourth quickest car on the grid. Therefore, your absolute minimum weekend requirement is 8th. That should be your absolute. And don't get me wrong, if he finished 8th, if everything went well every single race weekend, nobody crashed up top, whatever, and he finished 8th each week, you wouldn't really have an argument to complain, because you don't expect him to beat Alonso. I don't think anyone really in that position would expect to beat Alonso week in, week out. So, if you finish there, great. I think fair play, but it's not. It's 11th, and he's missing out on points, and these are crucial points. And you actually saw it towards the end of last season when Mercedes and McLaren, who only really had a good car second half of the season, were chasing them down in the constructors because they had such a good start to the year. They were the main challengers to Red Bull at the start of last year. Them and Ferrari, and then he got pipped by Mercedes and McLaren as well, and that's nothing to do with the amount of points Alonso was getting in. So he's literally potentially cost them 2 constructors' positions, which that is financially millions and millions of dollars. And yeah, okay, the only benefit to that is that they get a little bit more wind tunnel time. But, they're obviously, it's not creating an amazing car. Again, I think it's a much better car than where Stroll's putting it, is my point. So, I think as soon as Honda come in and Lawrence doesn't have the clout that he does at the minute, I think things are going to change around a lot in that team, if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. Sorry, just briefly lost the picture there. There we go. I'm just trying to mute my notifications. There we go. Right, sorry about that. Yeah, completely agree. He's really not living up to his end of the deal, really, with that team. And it's okay whilst his dad has got loads of money to throw to make up that deficit that he's costing them. Maybe he's just making, giving Alonso decent wind tunnel time for a better car for him. But yeah, it's not good enough, and it's a shame, because that team could be doing so much better. And yeah, it's just wasted potential. But then one could equally argue, if Lawrence Stroll doesn't come in, does that team even exist? So.
Yeah, but then Andretti would have probably bought him,
Well, it depends whether or not Andretti had to come in time. Remember, it was quite a while ago now. This all.
It was,
so,
yeah, it was.
I don't know, but yeah, it's not good enough from Lance Stroll at the moment, definitely. So moving on to P14 and Guan Yu Zhou. P14 for his finishing place, not great, but sprint quali, top 10. We were thinking, whoa, hang on a second, his home crowd is getting him there where he needs to be, and he finished 9th, which, again, in the sprint, isn't points. It's kind of heartbreaking that was his home Grand Prix, and if it had been the main race, that would have been points. But yeah, so great showing there. And then he's another one of these drivers that just did not show up again for the main race, and it's just like, I don't understand how you can go and have a really great quality and a good run, and then suddenly just disappear into the face of the planet. The only thing I can think of is that just everyone else, dialed in their setups that little bit better, and he's just dropped massively. But I mean, from being in the top 10 to 16th, that is a big drop off in performance from your qualifying. And yeah, finishing, as I say, 14th with 3 drivers DNFing, it's not great. A bit of a sad way to end his weekend, which started so well, in my opinion. And I really thought we were seeing a turnaround in form for him. But yeah, it's an odd one, really, to have such a great start and such a bad finish.
Yeah, like I said, started off great. I mean, the main thing I can think of as difference between that quali and the full event quali is the rain. So maybe his setup was dialed and he was expecting more rain throughout the weekend, that he could have benefited on that and
Then why didn't he
just
put that
had.
in a sprint race? Because there wasn't any rain in that. So
No, you're right. Yeah, it's like I said, sometimes how well you do in quali, keeping you out of sort of the back end of the midfield is actually a godsend. Just and not just being higher up in that DRS train as much as anything else. So, and I think, you know what, this is the best the Sauber cars looked this season for sure. I think whether it's just a sort of track dependent and maybe it just suited this track, I'm not 100% sure. We'll have to see on sort of similar tracks throughout the rest of the season. But that Sauber for the first time looked like it really could sort of potentially get points.
as I said, with Valtteri Bottas, he had a cracking run, and it's strange when we came into the year we were talking about the Saubers being the worst car, and they seem to be along with the Hasses, which we thought both those cars are going to be nowhere, and they're the only ones that seem to be able to get in the points.
I was going to say, it's actually the Williams and Alpine. It's the Williams and Alpine that are probably where we thought Haas and the Saubers are going to be. So it's it was a really nice touch at the end. I'm not sure how I don't know whether it was the right thing to do, but it was a lovely moment to see him getting emotional at the end when he got to park on the grid behind the front three and wave to the crowd. And I think it's a really special moment for the Chinese crowd because it's the first time they've actually had their own driver in F1, and hopefully that will inspire a lot more drivers from that nation to come through. And I really hope it does. And that was a lovely touching moment. It was really, really nice. But it's one of those do you really want to be celebrating finishing 14th like as if you'd won the thing? It's
a bit weird. Also, if
it's a bit strange.
Driver, why are we not doing it for all drivers?
Monaco for Leclerc, even if he finishes down in 10th or whatever.
I didn't like that. Thought it was a bit weird. But I think maybe it's a one-off because he's the first ever Chinese driver, maybe, and thing, so. But yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, that. But yeah, Sauber looking like a team on the up. Hopefully, Joe can get his stuff together. We want to see more of sprint quali and sprint race from him throughout the season, and less of the latter two of the main race and the main quali. Moving on to P13 and Pierre Gasly. Sprint, he finished 16th in the quali. Not a great run there. Then 15th, made up one position again. Very similar to Stroll and all that, where it's literally just a case of Fernando didn't finish, so they didn't make him any ground at all. Then it came to the main quali, he was 15th again, so 15th place is what he was liking apparently. And then he's finished 13th with 3 DNFs of cars that were all in front of him. It's not looking good for Gasly, is it? The Alpines bought an upgrade, so we thought they might be a bit closer. Ocon showed that they could be. Gasly's just not really looked on it at all this year, and that's a bit of a worrying situation for him. Hopefully, he can get his shit together, but it's bad times for the Frenchman at the moment.
Yeah, we said it, last week about the Japanese Grand Prix as well. I'm far, far more impressed. Don't get me wrong. I think everyone knows that car's been a bit of a dog for the first half bit of the season, and I'm not saying that either of the two drivers are massively underperforming compared to where the car is. I think actually, when you look at 13th and 11th, I think that's a good place from where they started the season. Nearly a second off the back of the rest of the pack. That's amazing turnaround since Bahrain. Can't argue with that. But Gasly, being 7.5 seconds behind Ocon, in what essentially was a neutralized race for the last 17 laps, was it 15 17 laps, something like that. So and finishing Gasly 70 seconds behind Verstappen. Spoiler alert. But yeah, literally finishing that far in the last 17 laps of the race is absolutely ridiculous.
Actually, I just want to correct you there. It's actually 69.2 seconds. Yeah, your point stands.
Yes.
It's
embarrassing. Do you know what? Now it's not quite 70 seconds. Now I think he's done amazingly well to stay within 70 seconds of him. No, it's like, don't worry, I'm not saying that there's a lot of cars a long, long way away from Verstappen. I'm not, not literally, I'm not trying to single Gasly out specifically on this occasion. I just saw it and thought it was a good sort of point to bring up. That's just mental how quick, arguably. I mean, part of it will be how slow the Alpine is, but just how quick Verstappen is. But either way, Gasly, yeah, we said it in Japan, or I harped on about it then, so I won't go too much more into it. Other than the fact that I think actually Ocon. Oh, at this point, I'm just going to turn around and say, do you know what? Ocon's doing actually a really good job, because Gasly, we know, is a good driver, and he's making him look average at the minute. Like, really, really average. He's obviously, there's nowhere near the offset of that we've mentioned from Hulkenberg to Mag, Albon to Sargent, Alonso to Stroll. So, not as big a sort of issues for Alpine. I think for them, it's not necessarily the driver lineup that's their biggest issue right now. But I think with them not continuing with Ocon, apparently, next year, which we broke last podcast.
Well, it's only a rumour, it's not actually a broken story. But...
Yeah, but the rumours of them not continuing with Ocon next season, or sort of potentially not carrying on.
Like madness, doesn't it?
I mean, it looks like they're backing the wrong horse, put it that way. If they've decided that they're not going to keep both drivers, yeah, it looks like they've backed the wrong horse, because Ocon is, making him look very average at the minute. It doesn't seem to matter what Gasly does in qualies or anything. Ocon seems to find a way, whether, and that, if they're not keeping Ocon, they're not going to be favouring him on strategy or anything compared to Gasly. So, you just got to say Ocon's doing a better job. But either way, for the team as a whole, much, much better for 11th and 13th compared to where they were in Bahrain. That's kind of the main thing to bring from this. Positive. Little, finish on a nice positive before we move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving to P12 and Alex Albon. So he had a sprint qualifying day to forget for 18th in the qualifying for the sprint, finishing ahead of his teammate, only just in the sprint quality. Actually, the closest margin I think I've seen in qualifying between him and Sargent. Literally, I think it's like 0.1 of a second. Like that's actually not great from him. And in the race, he finished 17th, just again ahead of his teammate. Not a good weekend again for the Williams. And then qualifying for the main race, bit better. He got up to 14th, so his teammate qualified 20th there, and the gap was a lot bigger.
That was the second gap I mentioned earlier.
Over a second, yeah, it's like 1.1 second or something like that. So, kind of redeeming himself there a bit, Albon in P14. Going on to finish P12, obviously there's a few issues with cars in front of him, but realistically I think probably the best Williams probably could have hoped for. It was looking like a point that he might have been able to get Ocon towards the end, and then he just started to drift away again. Williams not having a good start to this year. It's really sad, because last year they had a dog of a car but could still take a fight. Every now and again you'd have the Alex Albon train. It was a running joke, but he could keep people behind because of their straight line speed. They seem to have got rid of that straight line speed and now have a bit of a dog of a car. I'm hoping whatever James Vowles is doing is... I've just got a message through from the audience that Hamilton sucks. There you go. I'm not even talking about him, but yeah.
I know who that's from.
But so Albon, it's not getting a good time at the moment. He's a good driver. He showed last year what he can do, and Williams, I'm hoping, have got some good upgrades in the pipework to help them out, because chassis issues, all this it's really looking like a right mess there at the moment. Which last year we were raving how great James Vowles was, and now I'm kind of sitting here like, does he really know what he's doing? I don't know. I'm probably jumping to conclusions a little bit there, and he'll make me look like a fool later on in the season, but I can only hope that's the case, because I love Williams and I want them to be back in the points.
Yeah, I think for anything like James, obviously only really being in last season and this, I still think his true influence on the team itself isn't going to come to fruition until at least next season, really. So I kind of already knew that anyway, but it is definitely disappointing that they've taken a step backwards. I'm sure they definitely wouldn't have wanted to do that. Whether they push,
this car has been fully developed under him though. Last year,
yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, so whether they kept up. Maybe he was a bit naive and kept on working on last year's car longer than a lot of the other teams, which put him on the back foot this season. Maybe I'm not 100% sure. Only people at Williams will know that, but I have faith. I think James is as he's a good people manager. He's very open and honest about everything, which I do like. Very good. He's not. He's very good, like sort of in front of the cameras as well. Like, he just comes across very genuine, which I think a lot of other sometimes struggle with. So I really do want him to do well, but yeah, I think Williams really needs to, especially like being one of the small teams, they need to be back to where they were second half of last season. I think they'll struggle with Logan, but I think Albon, they should be, pushing for more than what they're getting at the moment, unfortunately. So, between the two Alpines, if you said that in Bahrain, you'd be crying. But obviously, they've made some upgrades and stuff, so, it is what it is. But hopefully, Williams need to do the same. They need to bring through whatever they've got. They've said about working on infrastructure and sort of sacrificing other bits for that. Well, proof's in the pudding, mate. You got to, pull it out now. Show what that infrastructure is going to give you.
Because they're at risk at the moment of becoming the worst team in sport again, which they've got away from. But look
exactly.
at the improvement that Alpine have made this weekend. If they've got more in the works, which apparently they do, then you can expect them to take a jump again. And then you're looking at, well, Haas have already scored points, so they're clearly doing better than Williams. Sauber keep being up there in the points and screwing themselves over, but if they stop doing that, then suddenly they're going to be ahead of them. And the Racing Bulls, Tsunoda's been showing up, getting them points, and it looks like potentially Ricciardo might be sorting his funk out as well. Then Williams are going to really struggle. I really hope that they've got something in the works, because it's sad to see that they could be the bottom team again after what looked like a promising turnaround last year. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, very disappointing. But yeah, like I said, bad weekend. Maybe it's just a track that didn't suit them very well, and hopefully Miami will be much better for Williams moving forward. So.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Moving on to P11 and Esteban Ocon. So, as I say, he didn't have a great sprint quali, 17th for him. In the race, finished 13th, so actually did a lot better than most other drivers in the sprint, made up quite a few places. Then qualified 13th for the main race and finished 11th. Drivers again in front of him did DNF, but it was a point where we heard that Hulkenberg was under investigation. He was within that gap that if Hulkenberg had got himself a penalty, the Alpine could have got a point. So I think overall, as you mentioned earlier, Esteban Ocon, he's doing everything that team is asking of him and then some. And, the rumours that maybe he's been talking to Toto Wolff, at first I thought, surely not. But, looking at performances like this, maybe he is. I'd be surprised if he goes to Mercedes, I'll be honest. But, he's definitely what I would call lead Alpine driver, as much as that would hurt Gasly to hear. And I can't really fault anything he's doing at the moment.
No, he's keeping out of the wall. He's, maximising the positions. Yeah, right. He's not bringing home bags of points yet, but as that Alpine gets inherently better and better throughout the season, which sure they'll be hoping that it does, he seems to be the one that's going to be in that prime position to maximise those points and get those in. So like you say, I've been really actually weirdly, despite being so low compared to where he's been in his past career, with quite fast cars like the Racing Points and stuff that he used to drive. I've actually been really impressed with him this season. You can only do as well as the machinery you got around you, and especially compared to a former Red Bull driver in Gasly, he's doing brilliantly well. Can't really fault him anymore. So, just keep doing what you're doing, and as the car improves, I'm sure he'll be bringing home some points. Hopefully, sooner rather than later for Alpine's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. They recently came out, I think, over this week and said that they aren't actually for sale or something like that, which is very strange because the other week we heard that they were for sale. So who knows what's going on with that team? As always, seems to be a bit of unstable situation going on there at the Alpine, Renault, whatever you want to call them team. We'll see. Who knows? Moving though into the points, and what a name that's becoming synonymous with points, I think, this season. Nico Hulkenberg in 10th place. Another great performance for Haas to bring home another point. Did P13 in the sprint quali before going down to P19. I'm not really sure what happened. You thought you had a puncture or something late on, didn't you, or something like that?
Yeah, I think there's some sort of issue. I'll have a quick look, see if I can
Yeah, but then
find out.
it then qualified P9 for the main race. So another one of these drivers that actually showed up when it counts mostly. Then to finish P10, point surprises at the end of the day, and he's doing everything Haas need of him. He's majority of Haas's points at this stage. I think K-Mag has got some of them, but majority of them are from Hulkenberg, and he's a driver that when he went out of the sport, I was a bit devastated because I think he's a very underappreciated driver. He's never really had a chance at a top team. Don't get me wrong, Haas is not that team. He's not
Mhm.
gonna suddenly start winning or anything like that. But I think he is a brilliant driver and doing absolutely everything he needs to do at Haas at the moment. So I fully expect him to be there next year. I fully expect him to be picking up more points throughout the rest of the season as well. Yeah, doing everything he needs to do for the team.
Yeah, I've just double checked. Magnussen does have 1 point this season. Hulkenberg has 4 now. So yeah, he's 4 times as successful as Magnussen this season, which is quite. It's not. It doesn't really show the full picture, obviously, because they're fighting for 1 point normally. They're maximised, but that puts them ahead of both Williams, both Alpines, both or one of the RBs, both Saubers. So fair play. Like he's there. They're both still behind Ollie Behrman, but that's arguably that's more to do with how well Ollie did as much as anything else. But yeah, no. Massively impressed with Hulkenberg. Yeah, can't necessarily see any updates as to what really went wrong with his race on the sprint, but I think it's more of the same this season. He's absolutely maximising that car, as we've just said for Ocon, as we say for Albon regularly. He's clearly the driver that's sort of most happy in that scenario, in that environment. And yeah, if Haas can keep sort of upgrading their car and keep ahead of the likes of Alpine and Williams, then they'll keep scoring these points throughout the rest of the season, or push for even more as and when you get sort of bigger crashes up the front, which I'm sure we will see at some point. Hopefully this season, there'll be a few sort of more mix-up races, or a heavy wet race, for example. Hulkenberg's been actually very good in the past in changeable conditions as well. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully we'll see some big points from him. But yeah, either way, keep doing what you're doing. It's really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to P9 and Lewis Hamilton. So he did not really have an amazing race, but we'll talk about his sprint, which was great. So P2 in the end in the sprint quali. Bit of a controversy around Lando Norris's lap being deleted and then reinstated. I feel like that's a bit harsh on Lewis because that kind of happened like halfway round his last lap that they decided to reinstate it. Which if everyone else is already finished and you might be starting to wind down your lap at that point, so it feels a bit harsh um, that was suddenly reinstated. I feel like Lewis should have probably had pole. I think both. I think the reason they reinstated Norris's is because Max's lap hadn't been deleted, which, in my opinion, is well, if you deleted Norris's, then you should have just deleted Max's. But anyway, moving on to the sprint race itself, finished P2 behind Verstappen. Looked for a while like he might have just been able to hold on to P1 and then had that lock up, allowing Verstappen into the DRS, and then it was done a lap later. Whether or not he would have finished the race in first, I doubt it. Still, I think Max would eventually have gotten him, but I think it would have happened later in the race. Then looking into quali for the main race, I have absolutely no idea what happened. I think he had a lap deleted in the end, but I mean it's not good enough. P18 for Lewis Hamilton. It's even if you have a lap deleted, you should have had another lap on the board to make sure that doesn't happen, and he didn't. So very poor form from Lewis there. Managed to fight his way back through though, from 18th to 9th in the race. Brilliant. It's not something that's synonymous with Lewis Hamilton as overtaking, in my opinion. I feel like over the years when he dominated the sport, a lot of it was from the front. Didn't really see him having to make these overtakes. So I think it was actually quite nice to see a race where he's actually had to battle his way through, and he's done it. And P9 from 18 is a good recovery drive, but I don't think that's where he should have been. I think he should have been behind his teammate or ahead of his teammate and fifth or seventh, that kind of area. So poor weekend, I think, from Lewis in that regards, but good on the sprint side. So a very weird situation where we've had a few drivers that have had good sprints and then seem to just not be able to handle the races. Bit of an odd anomaly from this weekend, but yeah, overall, I'm not going to say Hamilton sucks like the audience did, but I still don't think he had a great weekend overall.
No, I agree. It's wasn't a fantastic weekend. Just quickly covering the Norris lap that got deleted. It was deleted for his because he went wide, all wheels off the track on the last corner just before the start of the lap. So it was as we've found in the game as well. Like if you do sort of go off track on the last corner of a lap, it not only invalidates that lap but also the next one, because it sets a very dangerous precedent that you might get some tracks where you can get a massive slingshot off of going wide and taking a longer
straight line there.
yeah you could gain tons of time there. So I do think that sets a bit dangerous precedent that it was deleted. Obviously it must be a grey area of some sort to have it deleted and then not again. So yeah, I totally agree with you. That just doesn't seem something a bit unfair on that. Yeah, it's harsh on Norris that millimeter over or whatever it was, but rules are rules. Yeah, it is what it is. So bit harsh on Lewis on that one. But yeah, like you say, really, really disappointing in main quali. As one of those top fives that we keep mentioning, you've got to be in the top 10. That's anything other than the top 10. Q1 dropping out, especially when George's continue
as well, isn't it? Didn't he have issues in another race recently as well? He didn't get all the way through to Q3.
He hasn't been in Q3 a couple of times this year. So yeah, and bear in mind he's known for being a qualifying master, which has meant he hasn't had to come through the pack, as you said. And the most successful qualifier of all time by a long way. It's very shocking, disappointing. So again, I'm not sure whether he gambled on it being wetter this weekend than it did and had a bit more of a, I don't know, because he did really, really well in the wet. He was, in that qualifying, and then
synonymous with being good in the wet, though. To be
fair, he is. Yeah, he's always done really well in the wet. To be fair,
in the sprint race as well. So it's
did.
Bizarre that it just didn't then show up on the qualifying. It's literally late at the same day. So, but
yeah, it's like I said. I think you can always get caught out, and he did go, lock up and go deep into that hairpin at the end, which would have cost him probably good sort of like half a second or so. But yeah, a driver in a Mercedes and a driver of his caliber his banker lap should have been enough to get through Q1 really, even with sort of track progression and stuff. So yeah, a little bit disappointing. Well, very disappointing in that sense. But yeah, great result for the sprint. That was really nice to see. And I would disagree with you that he's not known for coming through the pack, though. I mean, look at that Turkey race with this GP2. He spun on the first lap and then drove all the way back through the second.
Back to GP2, though, is what I'm saying. In Formula 1, he's not synonymous with coming through the pack.
He won from 16th in Germany.
So you got one occasion. Okay.
I'm picking these.
He had in Formula 1?
I'm picking these out at the top of my head really easily. There's loads of examples of him having to come through the pack, but either way, we could argue this till the cows come home. But they're staying out in the fields. No, they're either way, whatever you think about it, it's a good drive to get back there. He was definitely helped though. On the flip side, definitely helped by the safety cars. There was massive gaps in there that he would have struggled to make up if those safety cars hadn't have brought the pack back together. So slightly distorts the race
but equally,
result.
To be in it to win it, he's in the right position.
Yeah,
time
absolutely.
That happens, so
and he stayed out of trouble when other cars were backing into each other. In that concertina effect in the hairpin, he stayed out of trouble and got through and benefited. So fair play. And yeah, best
at the end as well. So
yeah, no, he wasn't. So that's probably the best he could have hoped for from a bad weekend. He'll be hoping for better, but he clearly isn't happy with that car, and he's not got the confidence in it. He's complaining a lot about it, which we just don't really hear from George. So I don't know whether he's more used to crap cars because he did so many years in Williams. I don't know, but But
It'll be
yeah,
interesting to see
so
what happens next year when he's in the Ferrari. That's for sure.
it will, it absolutely will. Yeah, so I think it's all harsh though that all these like things keep on coming out saying, "Oh, Ferrari regretting their decision because Sainz is doing so well and Lewis is doing so badly." But you know, I think that's a bit harsh, like writing off a 7-time world champion just because he's not gelling with this car. It's like there's can be so many factors that cause that. So I think that's a bit ridiculous,
At least
to be
let him get
honest.
into the seat before you start saying that. You know, like if
Yeah,
he gets into the
you know,
seat and then he's absolutely trounced by Leclerc, then yeah, you can have that conversation. But
yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the fact that Science is doing really well, I'd argue that's more of a case of taking a look at what Leclerc's doing. To be honest, more than what Hamilton's doing. In that sense, you know, are they getting rid of the wrong driver as well? So not that I'd imagine that Ferrari would get rid of Leclerc, but you know what I mean. Like, yeah, I think they're barking up the wrong tree there. Personally, so yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's any way that Ferrari are actually sitting there going, "Oh, we regret bringing in a 7-time world champion."
Yeah, exactly.
So,
No. If nothing else, he'll bring in so much money and merch; it'll be worth it anyway.
exactly. You'll be wearing a Ferrari shirt.
I certainly won't be.
Moving on to P8 and Oscar Piastri. So he one of the few drivers that seemed to improve throughout the weekend. So P8 in the sprint qualifying, finished P7 in the sprint race. That mainly would have been from Alonso ahead of him going out, but still, you know, good position from him to do that, finishing behind his teammate as well on track. I guess his teammate did qualify in the front row, but he did have a incident in turn one and kind of fall back, so to still finish behind him, it's pretty good going. Then in the race, he qualified 5th and finished 8th, but let's keep in mind that he was actually doing quite well and got caught up in that whole Stroll trying to wipe out Ricciardo thing, which damaged his rear diffuser, I believe. So he is having issues, and to be fair, you know, the main part of the car's aerodynamics being the underneath, to have some damage there. I think he's done well to still finish P8 ahead of Lewis Hamilton at the end there. So yeah, do you know what? It looks bad on paper when you see that he started 5th and finished 8th, but with everything that happened to him, I actually think he's had a pretty good weekend. Yeah, I was hoping when he kind of after last year, I was hoping that he was going to be at Lando's level. He's not quite there. Still, it's only his second year, but yeah, he's done well this weekend. I think he's done very well.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting him to be on Lando's level. Yeah, I think Lando's a phenomenal driver. Yeah, I was expecting him to be maybe a touch closer than he is at the moment. However, like you say, with the amount of sort of things that happened to him over the weekend, I thought, yeah, he did relatively well. And remember, it's a track he's never driven on before. So all of that kind of like leeway he was given last year for basically getting to a load of tracks he's never done before. I think we've got to extend that to this weekend as well for him, and actually, arguably, I think he's done as well this weekend as he has sort of the rest of the season so far. So that's quite impressive on something he's not as familiar with. So yeah, no issues with Piastri there. I think he's still bringing home points from McLaren, which Aston Martin would be killing for a guy doing as well as Piastri is in their second seat. So yeah, I'm happy with him. Carry on as you are and keep sort of getting more experience and getting better, and I think we'll see him doing very well in the next few years to come. Actually, I think he'll if he can be in a seat that's competitive. I think Piastri, already a sprint race winner, so I think he'll he's got a lot of talent there, and he could be definitely one to watch in the future.
I think I just want to see him taking the fight to Lando a bit more on a few more tracks this year would be nice. But yeah, in general, he's doing a great job in that team. And he's part of the reason that I think McLaren are sitting third in the constructors at the moment, aren't they? So yeah, I'm going to let you confirm that now. Also, I'm going to look very silly, but I'm pretty sure they'll be up there.
Standings in the constructors, yeah, third place. You're right, and quite a way ahead of Mercedes actually.
No, they got struggling at the moment, isn't he? He's not been in the points a few times, and then Stroll is letting down Aston Martin. So yeah, I kind of expected them to be in third.
Yeah, I mean McLaren have 96 points, Mercedes only 52, and Aston only 40. So that's quite a jump actually, McLaren after 4 races. Got a nice little healthy buffer there.
Compare where they were last year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're at 60 points off Ferrari. Have got about 100, got 151. So yeah, yeah. No, I think
Looking good
doing a
for
really
them at
good
the
job.
moment. And
Yeah, I'd say so.
Andreas Stella last weekend at Japanese Grand Prix saying they've got upgrades and the thing that they think will mean that they'll be fighting for wins by the end of this year. So punchy talk from
Yeah.
them, and if they can deliver it, then we'll all be cheering for
I was going
McLaren.
to say, if they can
So
bring a upgrades set as sort of valuable as last year's one was, then I think they'll be streaks ahead of Red Bull by the end of the season. If they can do that, then fair play.
be beautiful.
It'll be. Do you know what? I actually wouldn't even mind a different team being dominant. Just the fact it's a different team would be lovely.
I, on the other hand, don't want anyone to be dominant.
No, obviously I don't. But
But yeah, no, I get what you mean. I get what you mean.
if anyone,
Moving on. No, go on. What you say?
no, no, if anyone is going to be dominant, it'd be nice to have it mix up year to year and give other people a chance. Which I wasn't saying when Mercedes were doing it. I understand that. So yeah.
It's when this Haas domination starts. That's what I'm moving for. No,
Oh, that's going to get boring really quick.
Moving on to P7 and Fernando Alonso. So Fernando Alonso had a cracking sprint qualifying, finishing P3 ahead of Max Verstappen. Didn't work out in the race with the DNF, finishing last. Obviously, that's rather unfortunate for him. Was running all right before that though. Was in the top four, I believe. Before that all happened, battling it with Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. And then in the qualifying for the main race was third, cracking again. Doing everything Aston Martin asked of him. Ended up finishing seventh after having to have a late pit stop, and going back up to seventh though was a pretty good going, but he was on soft tyres, I believe, and that's why they had to pit him. So yeah, doing a bit on the wrong tyre at the wrong time, I think, was his downfall there. But with fresh tyres, he was able to get himself back into the points, and P7 was a pretty good finish. I mean, we can't keep praising Fernando Alonso for all time. We know how good he is. He signed another 2-year contract. He's going to be the oldest driver since Graham Hill by the time that ends, which is madness. Graham Hill was before I even started watching Formula One, so in fact, it's probably before I was even born. So
yeah, I think he died before you were born.
yeah, exactly. So it's absolutely mental. The man's a machine. I just want him to get that win. I don't think there's a single person who watches the sport isn't there like we want Fernando to get his win. That he really needs it. I hope Aston can deliver him that car in 2026 with the Honda engine, that he can fight for the championship, because oh my god, a Fernando Alonso that can fight for the championship would be awesome to watch, especially on the form he's on at the moment. He seems to be. You could take at any point in his life, like look at his form, but he seems to just always be in the form of his life, apart from when he was in McLaren. But I don't know how much of that was when the McLaren's engine was appalling. But he's just a phenomenal driver, and we can't praise him enough. To be honest with you, he is definitely in that conversation, as you said earlier, for the GOAT of Formula One.
Yeah, great driving all weekend. What his DNF in the sprint, was just quite unfortunate. That one, unfortunately, but great race. It's just again his position. I think would have been much better, but for some reason Aston thought they'd put him out on soft tyres under the safety car, which were never going to go to the end. But that was after the first safety car. He got really screwed over with the second safety car because it brought all the pack back together, which meant he then had much less of a gap to build, or time to build a gap, to then get a pit stop and make his way back through. So and sort of really make the benefit of those soft tyres and that strategy. So yeah, maybe it would have worked out a bit better for him if we hadn't have had the second safety car. But we could only deal with obviously what happens and what comes in front of us, and turned out to be the wrong decision. It would have been much better on the other strategy and probably would have finished a few places higher. But to be fair, it was exciting towards the end of the race, seeing him come back through, and he was lightning quick and got the fastest lap. So fair play to him.
Cheeky extra point.
Cheeky extra point. So like exactly like you say, we can't, don't need to tell you guys what we think of him. He's just phenomenal, and just continues to perform. And when they say that at age your reaction starts slowing down, that catch that he made when he dipped a tyre into the gravel.
That's fantastic, wasn't it?
I don't think half of the young guns in this sport would have caught that. I mean, Carlos didn't catch that in quali. So, do you know, like, that is, for a 43-year-old or 42, whatever he is, that is ridiculously impressive. I mean, granted, obviously, you get
on it he still is at that age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, some people will say, well, he dipped a tyre in the thing, that was his fault. But, you know, yeah, everyone's human, everyone makes mistakes, but it's how you deal with them, and that was just insane. Absolutely incredible. Lightning reactions, knew exactly what to do straight away, and he barely even lost any time to Hamilton, who was firing down the straight by that point, so, and got in the following lap. Or, you know, so just ridiculous.
The fact that, like, if you watch it, he catches it and then immediately puts on DRS. Like, he gives no shits about what just happened. He's straight back on what it was.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah.
Alonso is on a
legend
level at the moment, and I honestly think, and everyone says Max Verstappen is the best driver of all time. If you put Alonso alongside Max Verstappen, I think Alonso beats him at the moment. On the current form that he's on, I think Alonso beats him. So that's probably why Red Bull didn't, want him.
Sign him.
Did not upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
Moving on to P6 and George Russell. So another strong weekend for him. Sprint quality wasn't as great though. He actually didn't make it through to Q3, which I think was the first time in this year he's not made a Q3 appearance for a sprint one, but still. I may be wrong there. I'm pretty sure.
Definitely for a sprint, because this is the first sprint of the year.
For sprint, but I'm pretty sure he's made every other Q3. I think it's Hamilton that's not. So, then in the sprint race, managed to get himself up to 8th. So that's actually, he's made up a few places there that aren't just from DNFs, because only Alonso DNF'd. So good effort from him there to finish there. Obviously his teammate starting at the front of the grid and finishing P2 that. Then we go to the main qualifying, and whereas his teammate didn't even make it through Q1, he got up to P8 off of it, so great place to start from, and then he finished in P6. He actually had to make overtakes to do that, so yeah. I think overall it's another strong weekend for George Russell, doing really. I don't think Mercedes car could be any further up. In fact, I think they're lucky with the pit stop Alonso had to have at the end to finish ahead of Aston. Otherwise, I think 7th is realistically the best that they could have hoped for this weekend. So, another strong weekend for Russell, I think.
Yeah, I was just checking. You're bang on. It's the first time he hasn't made Q3 this season. Good knowledge there, Ooms. Yeah, very good. But like I said, it was only the sprint, and there was rain towards the end of that session, so it might have distorted things slightly. It's weird because you really didn't hear a lot about Russell. He very went under the radar. Yeah, very under the radar. But at the same time, when other people are having calamities, he was just getting the job done, So, and especially compared to his teammate, who, don't get me wrong, I love both of them. I'm a big Mercedes fan and big fan of both the drivers. But he just quietly got on with the job. You don't hear him really moaning as much. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure I have heard him moan at times, but not as much. And he just just gets on with it and just seems to pull out sort of really consistent performances now, which I think is what we were asking for from him last year. Last year, I felt that there was more occasions where he was doing like heroics in one Grand Prix, but then having an absolute mare. And yes, all right, he had his issue in Australia. I'm not forgetting that he kind of did bin it when he had a good opportunity. But turn straight back into a good result for this race. Like I said, on a track he's only done once, so there's a lot of drivers out there with more experience around it than him, and he just quietly got on and did it. So I think that'll be the best that I think Mercedes could have hoped for, realistically. Obviously benefiting from Alonso's strange strategy, which again, you've got to be in the right place at the right time to benefit off of that. So he was, and he did. Benefiting off of Stroll, who's essentially got a better car but isn't performing, as we've already covered again. Mercedes, I clearly think, have the 5th best car. I'd argue, I think it's Red Bull, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, Aston, Mercedes. I think it's the actual pecking order. So, I think 9th and 10th for them two would be on par with, with no other issues going around, is on par with where the car should be. And he's quite regularly improving on that scenario. So I think it's more of the same, and hopefully they can just develop that car throughout the season and be more competitive. It's my only sort of worry and fear is that Russell hasn't seemed to been able to develop cars as well as when it was Hamilton and Bottas were. So I don't know whether that's an Achilles heel of him. He just doesn't like sort of give the same level of feedback, or he's pulling the car in too much of a different direction that Lewis likes it. Well, maybe I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point, but yeah, it'll be interesting, very very interesting to see how George gets on when he's not in Hamilton's shadow. I think, and like I said, he's doing a really good job this season in a sense of consistency now, and he's like I said, he's making people question 7-time world champion Lewis. So can you really say anything
well,
about that?
Like the first season he had against Lewis, he beat him as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think George is he's very underrated by a lot of people, and I think he's been unfortunate to have come into that team at the time that they're going through. I would have loved to have seen George Russell in that car in the 2020 or 2021 seasons with Lewis, because
when they should have brought him in, right?
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see. But hopefully Mercedes can pull it out of the bag, and we can have another team fighting at the front for the 2026 regs. Who knows? Who really knows? Like, we've got so many factors we don't know about this 26 regs. Who knows what's going to happen with this Red Bull power train? It could be an absolute dog, and Verstappen could be down in 19th for the Hatters. We just don't know.
That'd be so funny.
Yeah, can you imagine?
I think he'd retire. I think he'd just go like, nah, I don't need this.
I mean, to be fair, as said that, he'll just do it as long as he wants to, doesn't he? So. Right, moving on to P5, and the first of our Ferrari drivers with Carlos Sainz. He had a P5 in quali in sprint and ended up finishing P5 in the sprint, and then he qualified P7 for the main Grand Prix and finished P5 for the main Grand Prix. Yeah, it was a bit of an interesting one for Sainz this weekend. He wasn't as good as Leclerc over the whole weekend. A bit of a strange incident in the sprint race where he just decided to kind of go, no, you're going off the track, Charles, and just really weird when you think about every point matters, and they should have been trying to work together to keep Perez behind to just kind of do that. Yeah, I don't know. I think Leclerc was trying to reassert his number one driver in that team kind of role this weekend, which, finishing 10 seconds ahead of your teammate in the main race is a good way to kind of do that. So. Yeah, I don't think it was a bad weekend for Sainz, but considering every other weekend that he's competed in this year, he's been on the podium. I think maybe we do have to put it down as a bad weekend for him, Yeah, I don't know. It could just be an outlier, maybe, but yeah, not the best weekend for him this weekend.
Yeah, I think he's probably been arguably the form driver of the year, minus when he's in a hospital bed. He's been on fire, so... Yeah, it's kind of slight crash back down to reality for him, unfortunately, and did have that crash in qualifying 2, session 2. However, managed to get the car rolling, get it back to pits, new nose, and still finished, I think, third in that, or second or third in that session. So, I mean, that's a great turnaround there to kind of get straight back on the horse, as it was. So... Yeah, definitely not the same weekend that he's had for the first few races of the season.
Kind of appearing a little bit, like he's. I think, but then the fact that I'm thinking that shows how good his first season's been.
To be fair, I think as we see on the game and see throughout sort of F1 as well, I think there's some tracks that suit drivers better than others, and maybe this just is more of a track suited to Leclerc than Carlos. I think and I'm not trying to say Leclerc. I think Leclerc did a brilliant job this weekend, which is part of why Sainz looks a little bit, less impressive of what he's managed to achieve. I think part of it's got to go down to how well actually Leclerc did to really sort of, he could have been really down on confidence with how well Carlos has been doing so far this season, but yeah, he's like really picked it up this weekend and beating Carlos this weekend, which is good for him. And yeah, I think this is going to be the start of Leclerc's season, but I think Sainz, maybe I'm going to put it down as just a blip. I think he'll come back in Miami and be semi successful. Even though Leclerc was very quick there last year until he put it in a wall. So in quality anyway. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in Miami, see if whether the proper form table has changed now. in that Ferrari team, and maybe the adrenaline of losing his seat and has sort of maybe worn off a little bit for
I
Sainz.
mean,
But
possibly that's the case. I mean, it's interesting. A few races ago, it's like, oh, I'll slow down, tell Charles to come alongside, and then he's punting him off the track the next race. So yeah,
yeah,
it's interesting. I wonder if there's going to be a bit of disharmony there going forward, maybe. But
I
we'll
just
see.
think Sainz realizes that when it comes to the team game, he's fighting for his career to try and get another seat. I don't think he'll struggle to get another seat. I think there'll be options out there for him for next year, but he will want to be getting himself into that conversation that puts him in the best seat, and he needs to do that by impressing every single weekend. So I think he'll feel like Leclerc has a lot more to lose than him, so he will be pushing Leclerc to the limit, because as you always know, the first thing you need to do in F1 is beat your teammate.
Absolutely.
In the same machinery. So I think that's where Sainz's head will pretty much be for the rest of the year, if I'm completely honest. No matter how many times Fred Vasseur tries to have a chat with him, I think, you've sacked me, brought someone else in, so I'm going to do what I need to do for the rest of the season. And what are they going to do? Sack him? They already have, so that's fine. Here's what it is.
Speaking of his teammate, Charles Leclerc finishing ahead of Sainz in every session apart from the sprint quali. Where he finished 7th, but literally every single session that they finished, he literally finished the position ahead of Carlos, which is quite interesting. In the sprint, it was only by 3 seconds. As I just mentioned, in the race, he finished 10 seconds clear. So yeah, I think a good weekend for Charles. Maybe it will give him a bit more oomph back. I've beaten Carlos now, like back on it. Hopefully we can start to see some of those cracking qualifying performances he was throwing in last year, because they just seem to have not appeared this year. Whether or not the car's changed to a way where he doesn't feel like he can do that over a one-lap pace. But then I did hear that they did some adjustments to make it so the cars could run better in the race. So I think personally, if I was him, I'd prefer it to be better in the race anyway than one-lap pace. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, Carlos being behind him for the first time really, it's been pretty good for Leclerc, and I think realistically, the McLaren and the Red Bulls weren't going to be able to be caught by the Ferraris this weekend. So yeah, I think P4 is probably what they expected.
Yeah, no, like I just kind of covered really. Yeah, I think Leclerc's sort of started to turn it around a bit. Obviously, like the track, so we'll see what happens. I think Miami's going to be really telling. I think that was a race that suited Leclerc last year, so he looked really quick around there. So we'll see whether Leclerc's inherent speed around there or Sainz's form wins out between the two Ferrari drivers. And yeah, hopefully we'll see very close. I think it's telling as well that they're one of the few teammates actually finishing next to each other on the result. So I think they are a lot closer in sort of ability and sort of form or whatever it is at the moment. Yeah, definitely a lot closer to each other than a lot of the other teams on the grid, which is good for consistency for Ferrari. I know it's created a few sort of friction moments throughout the season, but realistically, I think most of the teams would be wishing their second driver was as good as Carlos Sainz, I think, at the end of the day. So yeah, very interesting to see what happens. But both drivers bringing home the points for Ferrari. They are very comfortably second place in the in the Constructors' Championship, and actually only about 45 odd points behind Red Bull. So realistically, like, they're not. If they can bring in like a big upgrade package or anything and do start sort of getting closer to Red Bull and everything, and Red Bull have a few issues like they did in Australia and they're not bulletproof, then who knows? They might be pushing Red Bull more than we thought they would be this season.
It would be nice to see, wouldn't it? It would be nice to see. Speaking of Red Bull, we'll move on to P3 and Sergio Perez.
Got these links down, haven't I? Just got
smooth transition.
Straight in.
Not a great sprint quali for Perez. P6, very disappointing. Should not really be there in that Red Bull for sure. But then only 2 places behind his teammate. Both Red Bulls struggling with the conditions, I think. So looking at the actual result for the sprint race, he managed to get himself up to P3, so on the podium. Again, though, with that, how good that car is, we probably would expect him to get that to P2. And then looking at the qualifying for the actual Grand Prix, P2 on the grid, quite close to Max, only 3 tenths off, so that's actually one of his better qualifying performances in a while. So yeah, looking good. then he dropped down at the start, struggled to get back through people, didn't really like making that much of an impression on me. His abilities there to get back to where he was to begin with. He never did make it. He finished P3 in the end behind Norris. Uh, it's a tough one, Perez, this weekend. Like, there's glimpses where he's close to Max, and then he's finishing 19 seconds down the road from him in the main race, and even worse, he's finishing 15 seconds behind him in a sprint. So I can't say this is a good weekend for him. I think any weekend where that Red Bull isn't finishing P2 is not good enough, really. That car is so dominant at the moment that it's anything other than P2 is not good enough. Do I know who they'd replace him with at the moment? No, honestly. I don't think there's any slam dunk other than possibly Carlos Sainz. If I was looking at, if I had to make a decision right now, if I was Red Bull, I'd be taking Sainz to replace him. As much as I love Ricardo, the performance isn't consistent there. Yuki, I think he got the hot-headedness and stuff like that. So yeah, I think currently it's between Sainz and Perez for that seat, and I'm pretty sure at the moment it's probably going to end up being Perez for next year, based on the form of everything there. I think Sainz is probably going to Audi, whether he wants to or not. But it's unfortunate, but I think that is what's probably going to happen. Yeah, but no, I think overall we can't call this a good weekend for Perez.
No, I agree with you. And I think it was really telling as well that when the safety car came in, or second safety car as it was, and Red Bull, so they double stacked both times, which meant that in the gap between the first safety car and the second one, Max was able to get a big enough gap that meant that they could double stack and not lose any time at all. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. I mean, that's a good, like, sort of, like I say, 4 or 5 seconds odd in that you need to do. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we cover every time. It's just like you say. I totally agree with you. If he's not second place, it's not good enough in that dominant kind of car. We would have been saying the same if it was back in the day with Bottas and Hamilton. When that car was really dominant. Obviously, they had a few years where Ferrari were close, and then it was a bit more sort of not a guaranteed second place, absolutely, but yeah, those sort of years, Bottas was P2 unless there was some sort of issue. So, and that's where Perez needs to be and strive to do. And yeah, he's just very inconsistent. He's a long, long way off Max. And like I said, I'm not saying that part of that is certainly down to how well Max is driving. Do not get me wrong on that. However, Max isn't bulletproof. He's not a machine, despite popular opinion. So, there should be opportunities, especially some tracks in the season where like other drivers can get close to him, and he's just not. And he's got the best chance because he's in the same machinery. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. Obviously, they're not going to do anything second half of the season. He's bringing in enough points for them to be clear, well clear in the constructors. So they'll be happy with that. So I think it's just sort of rinse and repeat for Red Bull, really. I agree with you. I would take Carlos Sainz over Perez if it was me. I think, yeah, Carlos deserves a shot in that car. It will be very interesting in 26 to see how we get on. But, yeah, I think it's just the same. I think the next driver we're about to speak to is probably got to be the driver of the weekend for me, personally. And has done the best job.
Lead into that again with a lovely little transition from you there.
There you go.
So P2 we had Lando Norris. So in the sprint quali got obviously that bit of a controversial undeleted lap to get P1. Then dropped down to P6 after I wanted to call it a dive bomb into turn 1 on Lewis Hamilton that failed, but he definitely messed up something and went wide, and then just didn't really manage to get back through.
He just tried to hang out the outside, and he went down to 7th actually in the end.
So he ended up finishing ahead of his teammate in 6th.
Yeah.
Then P4 quali for the main race is still up there, not quite as good as his lap time for. Obviously it was actually better because it was a dry track, but you know what I mean. Like didn't quite get where he needed to get in the top 3 for the qualifying for the main race. But yeah, did everything he needed to do in the race. He got himself up to 2nd place. I think. You said to McLaren at the beginning of the weekend, you'll get a 2nd place here. They would have laughed at you. they were talking about finishing how far he was going to finish behind the Ferraris at one point. He was joking about. So, yeah, amazing weekend from Norris. I'm not a Norris fan. I don't really like the guy. I won't shy away from that. I think he's a bit cocky and arrogant at times. But yeah, it works for Max, and he's now winning things. So maybe that's what you need to be in Formula One to get ahead. Is that way? And Norris is performing at the moment, doing what he needs to do. McLaren have him as their lead driver. A lot of people questioned that at the time, thinking he's quite young to be a team leader, but he's doing the job. He's putting the car where it needs to go. He's still not quite getting that first place that he's desperate for. And hopefully, for his sake, he can sort that out before the end of the year. If McLaren bring these upgrades they're talking about, we'll see.
Yeah, we will. Like I said, I think he's probably driver of the weekend. That's a great result, P2. He obviously benefited from Perez pitting for a second time, going on to a fresh set of tyres, and then not being able to make the most of that Red Bull. So, but that's partly down to the fact that Norris just did a really, really good job and kept out in front. So, great job throughout the weekend. Quali's not like right up there like we have seen him. Obviously, he got the sprint pole in the wet, but tried to hang around the outside. Lewis sort of just ushered him off to the side around the outside, and I think everyone would have done that in that scenario, to be honest. So yeah, but unfortunate for him because he kind of then had to drop all the way down to 7th. But yeah, his race result up to 2nd. It's that sort of full race was faultless in my view. That is by well outperforming that McLaren this weekend. So brilliant job from Norris. I think he would be probably the one that they should be fighting for more than anyone else to put in that second Red Bull seat. I think that'd be far too contentious for Max Verstappen. Too much of a challenge for Max to have someone that much on par with him. But I think it's the same argument that you said about Alonso. Really, to be honest, I think put Alonso or Norris in that second Red Bull seat, and I think Max is a much bigger headache on his hands to keep winning all this is done. But it's not going to happen. He's locked into McLaren.
I don't think Norris would go.
You really don't think?
The thing is, right? Yeah, he's
good mates.
Max Verstappen, but B,
they're good mates.
He's be going from a team that's got a Mercedes engine that he knows to a team that's got a Honda engine for 1 year, and then has doing a basically brand new engine. I just don't think that's an appealing option. Like, you just don't know what that Red Bull powertrain is going to be like. And Red Bull cars are amazing, but they've never made an engine before. And I know they're doing it in combination with Ford and things like that, but we've seen like when Honda came back into the sport and things, the engines aren't always on point, and I'm actually very concerned for Red Bull about where this engine is going to be at for them when it comes in. I think that is why Fernando Alonso just decided to double down with Aston Martin, and I think that Norris wouldn't leave McLaren for the same reason. I think that Red Bull powertrain unknownness is an off-putting feature at the moment. Like, you have a race-winning, potentially fighting car next year, but you have no idea what 2026 is going to have.
No, that's true, and obviously there's no guarantees that Newey's going to stick around either. Like, he was, there's rumours there as well. So yeah, I think realistically it would be a big benefit for next year. I think Red Bull are not going to lose that big a delta compared to the rest of the teams. So, but yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, I think Mercedes have been working on a new engine for 2026 ever since they froze the engines in 21 was it that they froze it? And where it was the new sort of hybrid era. Look how dominant any Mercedes engine was then. Yeah. So who knows? Who knows what it is going to be then? It's a big sort of mix up and also a change of chassis as well as engine in 2026. So yeah. No idea what the best thing to do is, and if we knew, it'd be easy, but it's not. So
if I knew, I'd be placing a big bet.
Yes, but yeah. So yeah, no, they'll yeah. I think we need to have that conversation sort of second half of the year. What's going on when we hear a few more sort of more concrete rumours that are flying around. But yeah, but for Norris is doing everything he needs to do to warrant that massive contract he got from McLaren. Brilliant job bringing home really good points from McLaren, and like you say, them sitting third in the constructors ahead of Mercedes and Aston Martin. Great, absolutely fantastic for them. So yeah, more
Exactly.
of the same.
Exactly, massive improvement from last year where they were one of
Yeah,
the worst teams on the grid at this time. So yeah,
yeah, they were.
right. Moving on to the very last driver, P1, and you'd be not surprised to find out it is Max Verstappen.
And that's all we've got
um,
time for.
well, we had hope at the beginning of the weekend. With sprint quali, they seem to be struggling a little bit, especially with the wet conditions and stuff. So I think I wasn't the only person praying for rain for the rain race, but alas didn't happen for either the sprint or the main race, and so Verstappen won both of those, and he qualified on pole for the main race again. Yeah, it's Max. Max is Max. He's doing everything he needs to do. He's smashing it out the park. He's taking home all the points, and yeah, it's nothing more we can really say. He's dominating the sport. Yeah, that's it. Will be interesting to see if it still happens in 2026.
Yeah. Again, I've heard quite a bit this weekend about Max being now comfortably inside the top best 5 drivers of all time. The list that Nico Rosberg read out at that time on the Sky commentary was Fangio, which I totally agree with. That's fine for those people who know sort of the history of the sport. Anyway, Michael Schumacher, Lewis, not in this order though, but I think he said Fangio, Lewis, Michael, Senna, and then mentioned Max, which I think you're definitely forgetting a few names from his history in that list. But
Alan Prost.
Jim Clark being the main one for me personally.
Yeah.
But that guy won everything he sat in, and no matter how good the car was. But either way, different eras, different times. But either way, the fact that he's even being mentioned in that conversation just tells you how good he's doing at the minute. And yeah, I've run out of things to say about him. Really, he's not making, even when he makes mistakes, they seem to go quicker than other people's mistakes. It's just, yeah, whatever luck that guy's got, he needs to share it with the rest of us because it's just, the guy's insane. Like I said, he's as close to a machine that any F1 driver can get. So, and he's in a car that suits him. He loves it. So another really good weekend from him, maximising points, and yeah, just hope something changes soon. Like in Australia again, we need more of them because it's it's going to get really samey, I suppose. Yeah, that's what I say. I mean, the only reason why we're talking about people going into that second seat is because we want somebody to bring him more of a challenge to him. And again, you have to go back to the fact that part of that is down to what a good job he's doing at the end of the day. Lewis did the same, Vettel did the same, Michael did the same. It's when you've got the machinery underneath you, make the most of it, and he absolutely is. And yeah, can't really say anything more than that, other than the fact that, yeah, I don't really see anyone beating him until 2026 regs, to be completely honest.
Let's hope that we've got a level playing field in 2026 and everyone's very close together and we can have an amazing season like we did in 2010 and 2012.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you very much, everybody who's tuned in and joined us. It's another 2 weeks for the next Grand Prix. Miami is on the 5th of May. So we will be back after that to talk to you about the Miami Grand Prix. But do check out our Racing League on Thursday nights. I am Umilius on Twitch, and he is Bowser_49. And you can also catch Wibsy as well. We will eventually manage to persuade him to come onto one of these and to give his opinions on things. But yes, until then, have a wonderful weekend.